Focus. Ideate. Innovate. Enable.
Indian customers today are more informed, aware and research-driven prior to making purchases. A one-size-fits-all approach does not work anymore, with special frameworks required to successfully tap into the Indian consumer market. Direct selling to customers, platform-based models and assisted commerce platforms are gaining clout. We've also witnessed a significant recasting of how changing customer beliefs have led to changes in the consumer wallet and consumption moments. Regardless of income, demographics or location, all consumers have been forced to hit the reset button on habitual behaviors. Digital acceleration and acceptance have been key. So what are the consumer shifts seen post the pandemic and with the resurgence of a new Bharat? Is consumer commerce the new wave to tap for companies? What strategies will consumer companies come up with to woo consumers in 2022? We discuss all of this on our show today. KPMG presents The Blueprint, the Business in the New Normal in association with CNBC-TV18. I am Prashant Nair and joining me is an esteemed panel of guests. Sameer Goyal, Managing Director, Coromandel International, Harsha V. Agarwal, Director, Imami, Prashant Tandon, CEO of 1MG, and Harsha Razdan, Partner and Head, Consumer Markets and Internet Business at KPMG India. Gentlemen, thank you very much, all of you, for being with us here. Mr. Razdan, if I can start with you and ask you to set the context for us. What does your research throw up in terms of the big changes we've seen over the last 1 year for consumer businesses, and which do you think are going to stay?
We just launched our recent version of the Me, My Life, My Wallet survey, which is actually a survey which seeks to understand consumer preferences, is done across 20 plus countries and 20,000 odd respondents. And yes, there have been a few interesting insights from there. Let me try and pick up a few of them. I think the first insight which will interest people is around social and I think social causes. The last 8 or 10 months has given a huge impetus to social causes that brands have and retailers have. And you notice that the typical Indian consumer is fast catching up with the Western market, whether it's the US or Europe, on brands or the penchant to try and consume brands which have a social cause linked to it. The second thing which I think I want to quote here is about financial priorities, which and when we surveyed our respondents, we realized that 75% of Indians were still concerned about what the pandemic meant for them and how far their careers would be impacted at all. They also had decided not to spend as much as in the past and increase their savings ratio, which is very unlikely of that of a Western European economy. So here, I would say there's a different trend that we see from and a trend which is divergent from the Western world. The third thing which I would talk about is data privacy and data sharing. Only about 30% of the respondents that we surveyed were happy to share their data for some kind of a loyalty program. Now, when we rewind and look at the last survey we did 2 years back, this number stood at 65% for India. And while this number has come down, we are still very far away from the world. And if you compare countries like UK or US, only 5% consumers are happy to share data for things such as loyalty programs. So these are three insights which I thought I should share with the group here, Prashant.
Mr. Goyal, let me come to you now. In your mind, and you are a company which works in the rural part of the economy, what are the top trends you've noticed and which of those are here to stay?
We are in the agriculture sector, so a couple of things which we saw. First was adoption of agriculture technology in the farmer's field and also automation in the manufacturing plants. The reason for that was, obviously there was certain amount of labor shortages. We also had, farmers very quickly adopting to mechanization. We have a joint venture with a Japanese company called Yanmar, and within 6 months they were able to do their annual targets. The second thing which we saw was, and we were pleasantly surprised, was the digital penetration and the usage in rural India. The rural internet coverage, it's a myth, actually has picked up and now has overtaken the urban coverage. and the usage of smartphone has also increased. And I think here, at least in our industry in fertilizer, government played a very good part in terms of, it had what is called the point of sale material, which actually the farmers can only buy fertilizer through that. I think the other thing which we are seeing in our industry is that the global firms are looking for alternate avenues to diversify, and basically the risks even for countries like China and India has become a good position for actually alternate sourcing. Here again, the government policy, firstly, as far as the fertilizer industries is concerned, all our old subsidies were cleared, by the additional 65,000 crores grant which happened, and the fact that the corporate tax has come down. And we are looking at, as Coromandel, we are looking at not only backward integration, but also expansion.
Mr. Agarwal, as a FMCG business, I mean, what have been the big changes that you have seen? I mean, this is a business where sort of distribution is pretty well set, pretty well defined in terms of how it happens, although there is disruption happening there. Did you see more of that over the last 1 year? How have things changed for you?
Consumers have become more conscious towards health and hygiene. They are consuming more health products. They are looking towards habits, to keep good hygiene. And this is not only in urban or in the smaller towns. This we see across urban as well as rural. Apart from that, the another trend what we have seen, the role of digital in a consumer's life, that has really increased. In fact, in April, consumers were spending every day more than 5 hours watching videos online. So that shows the kind of impact it has on a consumer's life. Digital spend is increasing for all the companies, even for us. The spend has gone up in digital in the last 1 year, I would say by around at least 2.5 to 3x. And going forward also, I believe, this is only going to increase. Third, very clear is, the importance of e-commerce as a channel of distribution. Obviously, in the month of April, May, there was a necessity for that. And now consumers have seen how convenient it is for them. And many times they even get great value out of what they are buying out there. Hence, the adaptation rate of e-commerce has certainly gone up.
Very interesting points there. Mr. Tandon, you are a digital company and all things digital have boomed over the last 1 year across industries. I mean, what's been your experience? What are the top trends you've noticed? And which one of those you think are more permanent in nature?
Healthcare was front and center during this phase, and it had high mind share. People were really reading about health a lot more, and they were engaging with preventative, proactive management of healthcare way more than they have typically done. So I think healthcare is on the agenda, well-being is on the agenda, and digital access to healthcare has been experienced by a lot of people as a safer alternative or a much more easier alternative that they would probably stick with hereafter. The other big change that we saw, at least again in healthcare being a multi-stakeholder thing, the consumer demand did go up and consumer interest in being involved in healthcare went up significantly. But also importantly, the doctors, the hospitals, the insurance company, and the government / regulatory support for the healthcare or the digital health sector also happened simultaneously. So what we saw was, and it's very monumental, that the entire ecosystem kind of came together to make access to healthcare digitally happen better.
I want to sort of now open this up and just touch upon a few important issues. One is, all of you mentioned digital in one form or the other and how, that's really helped all of you tide through the last 1 year, which has been pretty tough. What has that done to the cost of doing business is what I want to touch upon. And very briefly, if I can get all your responses. Mr. Goyal, has the cost of business gone up? From a listed universe, when we talk to companies, we generally, profit margins, for example, have gone up over the last 1 year in FY21. What have you seen, sir?
With people not traveling, having virtual conferences, in fact, we also had even some of our new product development as virtual launches, the cost of operation actually has come down. And not only that, the quality has improved because we can have a two-way conversation, say with the agriculture professor and the farmer out there in the field, but we can be very precise and concise. So for example, we want to talk to the pomegranate farmers, we know who the farmers are, and have a two-way conversation. So obviously the cost of business actually we've seen has come down, and that has helped our profitability.
Would you agree with that, Mr. Agarwal?
The profitability is growing. It's much better than last year. One is also because of the mindset that the companies have been able to cut all the wastages and corners wherever there was any, which has helped in increasing the profit margin. And overall, yes, right now some of the raw materials prices are going up, so we need to see for how long they continue and for how much do they go up. But overall, profit wise, there is no concern as of now.
How are the consumers' financial priorities changing? And Mr. Razdan, if you can sort of just set that ground for us. I think you did mention earlier as part of your research that a lot of the spending is utility driven. Luxury is taken a bit of a backseat. And I want to extend that point. Do you see hesitancy in terms of spending? And I'm talking about the future here. Or do you think, with the kind of shock we've had over the last 1 year, people are more open to spending on what is needed?
Prashant, you pick up a valid point, and when you look at digital, you look at the way Indian consumer is sort of evolving. We are catching up very fast with the Western world, and especially when you look at Bharat, the rural Indian consumer, even he or she is catching up very fast with urban India, with a few nuances, I would say. As a data point, the total number of internet consumers in Bharat or rural India is actually higher than urban India for the last few months already. Now, there are a few more insights which sort of are interesting when we note here. One of them is when you look at purchasing patterns, rural India or as I call it Bharat remains very much a deal or value centric. The consumers remain brand loyal, but are more likely to buy during sales periods and times when discount exists. The second thing, which is also worth noting, is about indigenous products. And what we've noticed in our survey also is that the rural consumer is 1.5 times as an index more likely to buy indigenous, local, make in India kind of products than compared to the urban or the top 4 or 5 cities if you compare them. So very interesting and contrasting insights in that way.
You sort of touched upon this Make in India theme. Mr. Goyal, how is this Make in India theme really impacting business?
When you look at rural, the customer is much more loyal. And for us, when you look at a farmer, when he takes anything agri inputs, whether it's seeds or even crop protection or fertilizer, his entire livelihood depends on those inputs. And over a period, we have seen that, with quality companies, people who are focusing on research and development and who know the consumer on farm and what he likes, and we have crop specific grades. That is the type of belief which the consumer has, and we are definitely seeing a shift towards Make in India. There's also the government policy which wants the country to become self-sufficient as part of Atmanirbhar Bharat, and therefore on strategic projects like fertilizer and all, they are encouraging the industry to invest. And like I said, government has been very focused on the rural area. They're giving more money to rural infrastructure and development, which is helping this process.
Mr. Tandon, in terms of reaching the consumer, reaching the customer, do you think it's essentially online will be a bigger and bigger pie when you look at the various channels of distribution?
Online access to healthcare and everything, actually, online commerce is definitely it's going to be a mainstream part, or mainstream way for people to actually transact and shop. So that move is very clear, and it's been seen in many other countries. It had to happen. What COVID did was just accelerated that process and brought it a few years faster. But the trends are, I believe, very, very clear.
I mean, the online channel, much more significant now and here to stay?
In India right now, it's around 3% of the overall sales. And for some companies, it's much more. And every company in the next 1 or 2 years is looking at a contribution of around 8 to 10% coming out of e-commerce. Now, and modern trade right now is somewhere around 9%. So you can see, that in the next 1 or 2 years, at least what we foresee that, it will neck to neck, at least with the modern trade, etc. And in some of the Asian countries, what we have seen that modern trade and e-commerce even contributes up to 60 to 70% of the overall market. So yes, general trade, I believe, in India will always be the larger pie. But yes, e-commerce will gain ground, and certainly, at least for the coming 5-10 years, it's going to go up.
Mr. Razdan, any thoughts on that? I mean, the channel of sale, I mean, the way of reaching the consumer, how is that changing, and what are you seeing on the ground?
We believe the word retail will sort of become irrelevant in the next few years and be replaced by something called as consumer commerce. And I think we've heard a lot of ideas, a lot of thoughts from the panel members, but we believe that there would be 3 big cohorts which will exist maybe a few years from now. And companies will have to decide which path they pick up and work on. The first one would be about platform and platform retailing and large multinational retailers. These kind of group of companies will continue to garner consumers, and large multinational retailers will try and build platform of their own kind to stay relevant in the space. The second group will be around independence and, I would say, category specialization. These are niches which would be difficult to be replicated by larger retailers, and hence, if you have a niche category or you're a small enough independent retailer where customer service is key, that niche will continue to exist. The third group is the biggest group where most brands, most retailers would sit, the most competitive, and also with the obsessive focus on cost. This group will include brands which are either becoming direct to consumer or brands, as I call them, national heroes, which are actually brands which have come around within the country and be consumed within the country, make in India kind of brands, or value-based retailer, which is around discounted.
Most of you have said that the rural has essentially been doing great through COVID, which was pretty tough. It held up on its own because of a variety of reasons. It was less affected in the first place. There was a fair bit of government support, as Mr. Goyal earlier outlined. Is that going to be a big focus area for consumer companies going forward as well? Not tier 1, but tier 2 and tier 3 cities. Mr. Agarwal, if you can take that.
Sure. In fact, I was just going through some of the latest data by AC Nielsen. So tier 2 and tier 3 cities have grown in October to December quarter by 9% and rural by 14%. And if you compare it to metros and tier 1 towns, they have just grown by 1%. Right? And if we compare it with pre-COVID, the metros were growing much faster than the tier 2, tier 3 cities. So that clearly shows, where the focus is going to be, because that is where the trend is, the growth is in rural tier 2 or tier 3 cities. Even from the spending perspective, when we see the consumers everywhere is more spending in essential items and the discretionary spends have gone down. But the overall sentiments in rural is much, much better is what we have seen. So certainly, yes, going forward, I would say rural and tier 2 and tier 3 cities will be one of the focus area for sure.
Tandon, for you though, one would imagine it is more urban than rural, or you're also seeing similar trends?
The latent demand is very clear and is contributing 25% from beyond the top 100 cities. And if you look at the further distribution, if I also add cities from 20 to 100, we're talking majority of our business actually coming from tier 2, 3, 4. So a fairly significant part of the value we bring as e-commerce, as well as the need of the ecosystem is actually, and the consumption is coming from tier 2, 3, 4. And that's why now we are going with a bigger, broader media campaign. I think most of the FMCG companies are going more digital, and we are now expanding into a little bit more of mass media, because we feel the consumer out there is engaging actually a lot more than we might have anticipated or thought.
Mr. Razdan, I mean, we're coming to the end of this program. Why don't you sort of, use your crystal ball, gaze into it, and tell us just sum it up all for us.
It's time for data-driven insights and decision-making rather than intuitive decision-making. We've talked about it for many years. We really have to get into action now. The second point would be around integration of technology or digital with business. It's one thing right now. Technology has to be able to integrate the front of the office, which is consumers, middle office and back office, vendors, procurement team, in a seamless manner. That's the only way the organization will remain agile and be able to respond to changes across the ecosystem. And the third is that ecosystem play and alliances. If you map any consumer need over the last few years, you realize that the competition or the ecosystem has just exploded. So rather than compete against the ecosystem, it's time to look at how you can form alliances and ensure that the ecosystem works to your advantage.
Well, that's a great point to end on. Some key takeaways from all of you: more digital all around, both in terms of consumer touch points and also ad spends, automation, mechanization, attempts to localize supply chains, paying more attention to tier 2, tier 3, and more data-driven decisions rather than going by intuition. Mr. Razdan, Mr. Goyal, Mr. Agarwal, Mr. Tandon, it's been a great conversation, gentlemen. Really insightful. That's it on this special program from us here. Thanks for watching.
Focus. Ideate. Innovate. Enable.